One of my favorite posters says it all. Yelling. The next best thing to being right. In many ways, this describes the culture that we live in. We love to argue, but we're not very good at it. We're not good at giving reasons and calmly offering facts and counter-assertions and evidence in favor of our propositions. We are really good at yelling, at shouting people down when they don't agree with us, at calling them names like Nazi and communist and socialist and fascist. We are good at a kind of a disagreeable discourse. We're good at disagreeing, but we're not good at arguing. This podcast is about arguing, or making claims and backing them up, and avoiding the common pitfalls called logical fallacies that people often fall into when they try to give good reasons for their beliefs. The podcast might as well be called Making Your Point Without Yelling. I'm going to go over some very basic points of argumentation or debate, or ways to make your case persuasive, but before I do that, I'm going to turn 2 slides over to Professor Flagbag.
Yo, Professor Flagdude. I think it is totally not fair that you flunked me on my logical reasoning assignment.
Yes. I thought you might feel that way. I suppose you have a reason, and perhaps even an argument, about why I should have done otherwise.
Totally. For one thing, I spent like 3 days on that paper, and I know a lot of people who only spent, like, an hour.
Impressive. And I suppose that you used a calculator to determine that 3 days is longer than 1 hour.
I found it on Wikipedia.
Excellent, and this was not even an assignment that required research. But I'm afraid that the amount of time you spent on the paper is simply a red herring.
A read what?
Red herring. A fish. A smelly, dead thing that unscrupulous fox hunters used to throw in the path of their opponents' dogs to try to lure them away from their real objective. In logic, a red herring is an irrelevant argument that someone throws out to try to detract attention from the real point, which, in this case, was whether or not your paper was any good, no matter how many hours you did or did not spend writing it.
And how am I supposed to know about fox hunting and stupid redfish?
Oh, I don't know. From my lecture perhaps. Or possibly the textbook.
Yeah, well, I heard from my roommate Brady that you got in trouble with the dean because you told him that his paper was silly. What do you know about logic anyway?
Ah, excellent. That is what is known as an ad hominem argument, or a personal attack that attempts to cast doubt on my reasoning by criticizing me personally. You seem to be a veritable font of experiential knowledge of the logical fallacies that you failed to learn anything about during class.
Yeah, well, you know what I think? I think you just failed me because you didn't like my nose ring and the Metallica tattoo on my butt.
Oh, you would be surprised how little I know about the writing on your nether regions. But tell me, what makes you think I failed you because of artistic differences?
That's easy. Before I got the nose ring and the tattoo, I was getting pretty good grades on my paper. But the first paper that I wrote after I got them got an F.
Ah, I see. You realize, of course, that this is a post hoc ergo propter hoc.
Hey, it's my butt. I'll put whatever I want on it.
Assuredly. But a post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy occurs when you argue that one thing caused another thing simply because it occurred first. This is always a fallacy, as mere temporal correlation does not establish causality.
Yeah, if you say so. But look, Professor Flagbag. I didn't want to mention it. But my dad just got fired from his job as a rodeo clown after he got rolled across the stadium in a barrel. If I flunk out this semester, I will lose my job in the bookstore and my mom and dad and 6 younger sisters will get kicked out of their house. Do you want a bunch of homeless little girls on your conscience?
Yes, I would have been disappointed if you hadn't at least tried the ab misericordiam, or appeal to pity. But I'm afraid it won't work either. I am obliged to grade your paper on its merits independent of terrible social consequences of your well-deserved failure.
Well, you know what? I got A's and B's from all my other professors this semester. How does it feel to be the only one in the whole college who failed me?
Pretty good, actually. It means that I am not susceptible to the bandwagon fallacy, or the assertion that I should do something because everyone else is doing it too. I suppose I shall just have to be the last person on my block to give you a good grade.
Yeah, well, just forget this anyway. What do I need to learn this logic stuff for? It's not like I'm an English major. I'm going to go into political advertising. Yo, Flag Dude, I revised this paper and you still gave me an F. No way. How can it still be an F if I revised it?
Are you suggesting that the fact that you revised the paper is, in and of itself, evidence that it is better than the first draft?
Well, duh. That's what revised means.
One would hope so, but, sadly, this is not always the case. This is what is called an oversimplification, or, should you ever care about proper terminology, a fallacy of dicto simpliciter. Though revisions can, and often do, improve papers, the fact of a revision itself is insufficient to establish that the paper has indeed improved.
Okay, but look at my arguments. I did exactly what you said and gave good reasons to prove a controversial thesis statement.
And what was this brilliant thesis statement?
That, no matter what stupid biologists say, tomatoes are really vegetables.
Ah yes, now I recall. And, remind me, what was the first point that you made in defense of this stunningly original piece of rhetoric?
Tomatoes are vegetables because they taste vegetable-y. You can't argue with that.
No, I don't suppose that I can. Not because it is a good argument, but because it is completely circular reasoning. That tomatoes taste like vegetables only counts as evidence that they are vegetables if you accept the premise that things that taste like vegetables are indeed vegetables. Which is precisely the point that you should be trying to prove.
Like whatever. But what about my second point? That the Supreme Court decided in 1893 that tomatoes were vegetables. I wrote 4 whole paragraphs on that.
You did indeed. And, amazingly, your 4 paragraphs have the same words in them as the 4 paragraphs in the Wikipedia article on the same subject. But no matter. Citing the Supreme Court on a matter of biological definition is simply an appeal to authority. It sounds persuasive, but it is not. Courts have authority to rule on who pays what taxes, but they are not the final arbiters of scientific truth. They cannot declare something to be a vegetable any more than they could declare you to be a turnip. Or, for that matter, a student.
Okay, but what about the consequences that I wrote about in my last paragraph? If people start considering tomatoes to be a fruit, then they will have to put them in fruit salads, which will lead to tomato shortages and price fixing in South America. And this will cause democratic governments to fall to the communists, who will promise free tomatoes to everyone when what they really mean is a bunch of bland, homogeneous ketchup.
Yes. I do remember that you wrote something like that. I must say that it is not the likeliest scenario I have heard this week. But even if it were, it would still be a slippery slope, or an argument based on some supposed negative result that may occur down the road if something relatively minor happens now. But slippery slope arguments are not logically valid. If you want to argue for, or against, a proposition, you must do so on its own merits, not on the vague and unsubstantiated threat of some terrible calamity down the road.
I am getting sick of this. I'll tell you what. If you give me a better grade, I won't come over to your house tonight and kick your butt.
Ah yes. We end where bad reasoning and inept arguments always end. With an appeal to force. A desire to secure an outcome, not by rhetorical power, but by sheer physical domination. It has always been thus. Unfortunately, however, both my butt, and the considerably more sizable butt of my 150-pound Doberman Pinscher, are just going to have to take our chances.
Okay, let's break all of that down a little bit. There are a lot of fallacies, lots of them have Latin names, and it's not that important that you learn the names, especially the ones in Latin, but a couple of points that you should just keep remembering as you make your arguments. First, don't confuse something being correlated with something being causal. And by that I mean, just because something happens and then something else happens doesn't mean that thing A caused thing B. This leads a lot of people down the wrong track. A lot of people get data that is correlative, that shows that there is a relationship between something, and they interpret that as being causative. So you get a woman who plays Mozart while she's pregnant, and her child comes out smart, and you do this 1,000 times, and you have a lot of data that correlates the playing of Mozart with smart babies, but that doesn't mean that Mozart causes smart babies, though that was, during the 80s, a very popular theory based on what was correlative data. And it turns out that women who play Mozart to their embryonic babies do thousands of other things that contribute to the intelligence of their child. So the correlation in that case did not prove to be causative. Second, understand what is at issue. Understand what is really being argued about. In any debate that really is a debate or an argument, there is something that the two sides disagree on, and very often there are a lot of things that they don't disagree on that they spend a lot of time arguing about anyway, even though they haven't gotten to the issue that they both disagree on. Finally, once you find the question that is at issue, or the thing that is really being disagreed about, stick to it. Do not focus on unrelated questions like your opinions of the person making the argument, that's the ad hominem argument, or emotionally charged questions that aren't really at issue, or related issues that are only tangentially related to the real issue. Find the argument that matters and then keep focusing on it. To know how to support a claim, you need to know what kind of claim you're making. If you are making a claim of fact, you need to support it with some kind of statistic, fact, data, or citation of a relevant, not, as we saw with Professor Flagbag, an irrelevant authority. For example, if you claim that 25% of children in America are overweight or obese, you need to find the facts that support that. There are surveys and there is data that will support or not support that claim. Support claims of value by finding a shared value between yourself and the people that you're arguing or presenting your information to. If you're saying that it's a bad thing or a national tragedy, or on the other hand, no big deal at all that 25% of America's children are overweight, you can't support that with facts because you're not making a claim of fact. What you can do is find some value that people share, whether it's a value of health or a value of happiness or a value of attractiveness, and relate the claim that you're making to a value that you can reasonably estimate to be shared by everybody you're talking with. Finally, support claims of policy with facts and shared values, but also with pragmatic arguments. For example, if you want to argue that we need to serve fruit in school cafeterias and get rid of soda, that is supported with the facts that you're talking about children being overweight, may be supported with shared values, but you also have to make the additional argument that it's going to work. These are the three basic kinds of claims that people can make: claims of fact, claims of value, claims of policy. Each one of them has a different mechanism that you need to use when marshaling your evidence in your support of that claim. And finally, just a few hints about giving reasons, because this is what argument comes down to. You make a claim, you assert a thesis, and then you give people reasons to either believe what you believe, know what you know, or do what you want them to do. First, as I said before, always identify those values and goals that you share with the person you're trying to persuade. If you don't share any values, you're going to have a very difficult time arguing about anything other than facts. But most people, all human beings, share many, many values. And it's up to the person making the communication to identify and to appeal to those values. Remember that nobody is completely good and nobody is completely bad. We can appeal to people's higher side, their charity, their patriotism, their sense of family, their love, all of these things, and those work with people because people have those elements. Nonetheless, most people are often self-interested. They do what they can for everybody else, but when it comes right down to it, they're interested in themselves and their family. And you need to be able to make both kinds of appeals, and sometimes both kinds of appeals at once, to take advantage of that very split personality nature that most people have. And finally, as you're giving reasons, especially if it looks like you're winning, don't back people into a corner. Don't try to prove how smart you are. If your goal is to persuade somebody of something, you're going to have to do it by becoming a persuasive person. And that's what our next podcast is about, the concept of ethos, or the concept of persuading people by becoming persuasive.